Beneath the sun-scorched streets of ancient Thebes, hidden 3 levels deep in a temple carved from limestone, an 18-year-old girl lay completely alone on a cold altar, her pulse hammering in her ears as 7 priestesses circled her like shadows, and the high priest approached with instruments that gleamed with a promise of pain, a ceremony that would strip her of everything she was, everything she knew, and everything she could ever call her own. But that day had not started in darkness. 6 months earlier, Nefertari had woken to sunlight spilling over her family's courtyard, warming the bright painted walls that depicted gardens, festivals, and hunting scenes. The air carried the scent of the Nile, wet mud, and the lotus flowers floating in the small stone pool in the center of the yard. Birds called to one another from the riverbank, and the sound of the city's early bustle drifted faintly from the streets beyond. She stretched on her straw mattress, feeling the rough weave of the linen sheets beneath her fingers. Her mother, Taret, moved silently in the kitchen, preparing bread and figs, setting clay cups of beer on the low table. The aroma of baked dough mingled with the faint bitterness of the beer, a comforting, ordinary smell. Merit, her younger sister, sat nearby, fussing over her embroidery. Nefertari smiled at her impatience, her bright eyes reflecting the morning light. Her father, Amenhotep, entered the courtyard holding a stack of papyrus sheets. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his robes immaculate, his hands calloused from years of counting goods, calculating prices, and ensuring the family's trade in fine linen and papyrus remained prosperous. He caught sight of Nefertari and offered a proud smile, the kind reserved for a daughter who could read hieratic script fluently, who could handle numbers and contracts with ease, who was clever beyond her years. The morning passed in routine. Nefertari helped her mother weigh figs and bread, checked calculations for the papyrus shipments, and made notes for the family business. She laughed with Merit when the younger girl's embroidery thread became hopelessly tangled. Everything felt ordinary, safe, and full of warmth. She did not know that the next morning, everything she had known would vanish. The warning came quietly, almost politely. A messenger arrived from the temple, stepping lightly into the courtyard, carrying a scroll sealed with the mark of Hathor. His sandals whispered against the stone floor, and he spoke with measured formality. The temple had received the purification fees. Nefertari was expected at dawn the following day. She was to bring nothing with her. Everything would be provided. Her mother's quiet tears fell, hidden behind her hands. Her father's face tightened, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes averted. Merit's confused question, "What does purification mean?" was met with silence. No one answered. The word hung in the air, strange and alien, as if it had already begun to erase the life they had known. That night, Nefertari could not sleep. She lay on her mattress listening to her parents' hushed voices, words she could not make out, arguments carried in tones too low to understand. Her stomach twisted with unease, a creeping fear that pressed against her chest. She rose quietly, holding her sister's small hand, feeling the warmth and comfort of family before stepping into the shadow of the unknown. Merit pressed a small amulet into Nefertari's palm, the charm of Taret, the goddess who protected women in childbirth. "Keep this with you," she whispered. "It will keep you safe." Nefertari nodded, holding the tiny object tightly. She did not yet know it would be the only tangible reminder of her old life she would ever have. Dawn came too quickly. The messenger returned, silent, and Nefertari dressed in the plainest of linen robes, her heart pounding with a strange mixture of fear and disbelief. She kissed her parents quickly, held her sister's hand for one last moment, and stepped into the street, leaving behind the sun-warmed courtyard, the laughter, the smells of bread and lotus flowers, and the safety of a world that would never exist for her again. The streets of Thebes were waking. Merchants shouted prices for fish and grain, donkeys clattered over stone streets, and the aroma of baked goods drifted from small stalls. But Nefertari did not notice. Her mind was fixed on the looming shadow of the temple ahead, on the stories she had heard as a child about purification, rituals, and the mysterious chambers beneath the stones where priestesses worked. She thought perhaps it was only ceremonial, a ritual to bless her for marriage. She could not imagine what awaited her. As she entered the temple complex, the sunlight faded behind massive stone columns carved with images of Hathor, Isis, and other deities. The familiar sense of the city, dust, river, food, gave way to incense, thick and pungent, filling her lungs with a sweet, choking smoke. Shadows stretched long across the limestone floor, and every footstep echoed unnaturally, as though the temple itself was alive, watching. Two priestesses stepped forward to guide her. They were silent, their heads shaved and painted with ochre, their eyes dark and unreadable. Nefertari's stomach churned. Their hands were firm on her arms, controlling her movement. She stumbled on the stone floor. Her legs had never been held so firmly. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to plead, but no words came. She was being drawn deeper into the temple, deeper into the labyrinth of stone corridors, her old life shrinking behind her with each echoing step. The chambers ahead were dark, lit only by flickering oil lamps. The air smelled of resin and heat, the shadows dancing like living things on the walls. She could feel the cold limestone beneath her fingers as she was led to a small room, the door closing behind her with a final, echoing thud. The walls pressed close. No windows allowed light or air from the outside. She counted 10 paces from one wall to the other, 6 paces in width. Time began to lose meaning. One step forward, one backward, and the same stone floor, the same shadows, the same endless silence. Days would pass in this small, confining space. Her only contact with another human being was brief, 30 seconds at most, when a priestess would bring bread and beer. No conversation, no comfort. She was alone, isolated, her body becoming restless from inactivity, her mind reaching for the human connection that would not come. By the 3rd day, she began talking to the shadows on the walls, whispering her own name to remind herself she existed, that she was still Nefertari, daughter of Amenhotep, that she was still real. She did not yet know that this was only the beginning. The chamber, the isolation, the fear, it was the first phase, designed not to purify, but to break, to strip away identity, to teach her that she belonged to the temple now, not to herself. And when the next phase began, when the bathing, the shaving, the bitter herbs came, she would understand fully the price of obedience, the cost of tradition, and the cruelty hidden beneath the golden sun of Thebes. For now she was still a girl with a family, still able to remember laughter, the smell of bread, the warmth of her sister's hand. But the temple had begun its work. Time was no longer measured in days or hours, only in shadows, only in the echo of footsteps that would never bring comfort. The first step into the underworld of her own life had been taken, and there was no turning back.
The door clanged shut behind Nefertari, and for the first time in her life, she was completely alone. No sunlight, no laughter, no smells of bread or river, nothing but the oppressive stone walls that seemed to close in with every breath. The air was heavy, smelling faintly of oil lamps and stone, mixed with an underlying metallic tang that made her stomach twist. She realized quickly that no one would speak to her, that no one cared if she was hungry, frightened, or crying. The first day was the hardest in some ways, because her mind still clung to the illusion of normality. She counted the paces across the floor, traced the cracks in the limestone walls with her eyes and whispered her name into the silence, hoping someone, anyone, would answer. Of course, no one did. The priestess brought her food once that day, a small loaf of bread and a cup of thin beer. The tray clinked against the stone floor as it was set before her. 30 seconds, not a word spoken. Then the priestess left, leaving her staring at the plain food, thinking about her family. Her mother's quiet tears, her father's stiff back, her sister's small amulet. Everything felt painfully close and impossibly far. By the second day, the isolation began to gnaw at her mind. Shadows on the walls stretched and bent as the single lamp flickered. The hieroglyphics carved into the stone seemed to shift and writhe, forming faces she could almost recognize, voices she could almost hear. She whispered to them, asking them questions, answering her own doubts, inventing conversations to hear a human voice, to feel less alone. Her body ached from inactivity, her muscles stiff and uncooperative. She walked the room slowly, counting steps, turning in circles, trying to maintain some semblance of control in a world that had stripped it away. Sleep came only in fragments, broken by the echoing footsteps of priestesses in distant corridors, by the distant hum of chanting she could not understand. Dreams merged with reality. She could not tell if the shadows were alive or her mind unraveling. Every flicker of flame became a warning, every whisper of wind a threat. Fear had taken root, unrelenting and deep, shaping her thoughts, bending her perception of what was safe. By the third day, the isolation began to strip away more than her comfort. It started to erode her identity. She no longer knew the time of day. She could not remember the texture of her sister's hair or the warmth of her mother's hand. The memory of her father's laugh became a dream she could barely recall, fading like smoke through fingers. The priestess's brief visits, once unbearable, became the highlights of her day. She smiled desperately, trying to catch their eyes, whispering, "Thank you," though she knew they would not respond. The food they brought was barely enough to sustain her. Bread, water, weak beer, nothing else. She counted herself lucky when the cup of water arrived without the priestess saying a word. She longed for conversation, for a human touch, for acknowledgement. Her mind began to fill in the void with imagined voices, imagined company. She spoke aloud to walls, to shadows, to the empty stone floor, clinging to fragments of sanity. On the fourth day, hallucinations began to dominate her waking hours. The walls moved, breathing with a slow, living rhythm. The shadows on the floor formed patterns she could almost recognize, a face here, a hand there, a figure moving just out of reach. The flicker of the lamp seemed to speak in rhythms, speaking in a language she almost understood. She did not scream, she did not fight. She only watched and listened, trying to parse reality from illusion. By the fifth day, she had begun to whisper constantly, holding conversations with the stone itself. She asked questions and answered them herself, sometimes disagreeing, sometimes consoling, sometimes scolding. The walls had become her audience, the stone her confidant. The mind craves connection, even if that connection is imagined. Nefertari's body had begun to change as well. Hunger gnawed at her, though the bread and beer kept her barely alive. Her skin itched from lack of movement, small sores forming from the constant friction of the stone floor. Her muscles felt weak, her joints stiff and sore. The ritual's early phase was as much physical as it was mental. Teach her body that it was not hers, that every movement must be permitted, that all control had been stripped away. She began to measure her days not by hours or sunlight, but by the rhythm of her mind's breakdown. When she spoke to the shadows, they answered. When she called out to the empty corners, voices responded. Sometimes the voices were kind, sometimes cruel. She could not tell if she was imagining them or if the temple's magic was real. Her intelligence, once her greatest gift, became a curse, allowing her to understand that this was deliberate, designed, controlled. Her mind and body were being reshaped before her very eyes. On the sixth day, the ritual's psychological impact deepened. She had lost track of her identity entirely. The girl who had counted papyrus sheets, who had played with her sister, who had laughed with her mother, she was a memory, fleeting, almost dreamlike. The isolation and sensory manipulation had done their work. She existed only in the present, reacting, surviving, obeying. Her mind began to crave the brief, indifferent interactions with the priestess. That small ritual of being fed became a tether to reality, a lifeline she clutched desperately. By the seventh day, she had become compliant without question. Her body obeyed instinctively. Her thoughts were fractured, her memories of home dimmed. She no longer was Nefertari, daughter of Amenhotep. She was a subject of the temple, a vessel waiting for the next phase. Isolation had not only prepared her for what was coming, it had reshaped her into someone who could endure it. And even as the days of sensory deprivation ended, the temple had only just begun its work. The walls that once had been her prison were now the foundation for something darker. The next phase, the cleansing, would strip away her body's last remnants of autonomy. Her hair, her skin, the amulet from her sister, all would be taken. Pain and humiliation awaited, designed not by chance, but by centuries of ritualized understanding of fear and compliance. Nefertari lay on the cold floor, listening to the shadows, waiting for the priestess to return. She no longer resisted. Resistance had become impossible. Her body too weak, her mind too fractured. And yet somewhere deep inside, a tiny ember of herself, the girl who had eaten bread in her courtyard, laughed with merit, felt her mother's touch, still existed, barely alive, hidden behind the layers of fear, trauma, and conditioning. The temple had broken her world. It had begun breaking her body, but it had not yet touched that ember. And for now, that tiny spark was all that remained of Nefertari, the girl who had once been free.
Nefertari had survived the first week in total isolation, but survival did not mean freedom. The temple had prepared her mind, softened her will, fractured her sense of self, and now it turned to her body. The priestesses came for her in the early morning, their steps deliberate, silent except for the faint rustle of linen robes and the glint of bronze tools at their belts. Two of them grasped her arms firmly, another guiding her legs. She had not walked properly in days. Her body, once full of strength and vitality, now felt weak, foreign, as if it belonged to someone else. The corridors were colder than the small cells she had been confined to. The walls pressed close, echoing each of her staggered steps. The air smelled faintly of incense, but mixed with a pungent tang she had not noticed before, perhaps from the tools, perhaps from the bodies of those who had come before her. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Her mind, still fragile from isolation, could barely form coherent thoughts. They led her into a bathing chamber, large, lit by dozens of lamps. The flickering flames reflected off the water in the stone pool at the center. Steam curled in the air, warm and suffocating after the chill of the corridors. Her skin prickled as the heat enveloped her. They pushed her toward the water, their hands unyielding. The amulet from her sister, the last connection to home, was pried from her fingers. She tried to hold on, to remember the small comfort it had brought, but it was gone. Her tears fell freely, but no one offered comfort. The priestesses began the ritual cleansing. The linen shift that had covered her body was stripped away roughly. She flinched, wincing at the cold air against her bare skin, but they did not pause.
Her sandals were torn from her feet. Every movement of protest was met with impassive force. The water in the pool was scalding, infused with natron and herbs. As she stepped into it, the heat burned through her already fragile nerves, stinging her raw, sensitive skin. They scrubbed her with pumice stones, scraping away not just dirt, but layers of self. Every motion was purposeful, methodical, designed to cause pain while instilling submission. Her flesh became red and raw, tiny cuts forming along the curves of her arms, legs, and torso. She cried out, but the water swallowed her voice. Then came the shaving. Bronze razors, dull and jagged, scraped across her skin, pulling hair, cutting, drawing thin ribbons of blood. Every stroke was a reminder that she belonged not to herself, but to the temple, to the ritual, to the gods. She tried to resist, tried to curl into herself, tried to shield her body with trembling hands, but resistance was met with force. Oils were applied afterward, burning against her raw skin, a cruel contrast to the brief relief of water. When the priestesses were done, they held up a polished bronze mirror. Nefertari stared at her reflection and recoiled. The girl she had been, her face, her hair, her body, was gone. In its place was someone unfamiliar, someone marked by ritual, by pain, by the deliberate erasure of identity. Bald, red, raw, and trembling, she was forced to see herself not as a person, but as an object, a vessel awaiting the next stage. The white shift they gave her was rough and scratchy, covering her nakedness without offering comfort. No jewelry, no amulet, no marker of individuality remained. She looked at herself in the water, at the figure staring back, and for the first time realized that the temple's purpose was not spiritual enlightenment, not divine favor, it was control. She was no longer Nefertari. She was an instrument, waiting to be used, reshaped, broken, and rebuilt according to centuries of ritual tradition. Her body was physically weakened, but the psychological assault had only begun. They left her in the pool room to recover, though the recovery was minimal. Every movement caused pain. Every breath reminded her of what had been done. The priestess's silence was oppressive, a constant assertion that she was powerless. For hours she floated, shivering, her mind returning to the small fragments of memory she still clung to, her sister's laugh, the courtyard, the smell of fresh bread. Those memories felt distant, almost unreal, like shadows she could no longer reach. By nightfall, the priests returned with new implements, preparations for the next stage already underway. Small obsidian blades, copper hooks, bronze pins, and bowls of natron were laid out with careful precision. The tools were not for decoration. Each one had been designed over generations for a specific purpose: to cause maximum pain without causing death, to preserve her body in a state of compliance, to create wounds that would teach obedience. The tools were not just tools, they were instruments of transformation. Her mind and body had been primed. She was no longer a girl with a family, a home, a life. She was something else, something molded by centuries of ritual and tradition. The temple had taken her, remade her, and the opening ceremony, the true test, was waiting. She lay in the cold water pool, shivering, alone, and for the first time wondered if she would ever recognize herself again.
The stone altar awaited her, cold and unyielding, in a chamber 3 levels beneath the temple. The air was thick with incense, a suffocating mixture of myrrh, frankincense, and herbs designed to disorient. Flickering lamplight cast strange, dancing shadows that made the hieroglyphics on the walls seem alive, writhing and shifting as if they watched her every movement. Nefertari's body ached from the cleansing. Every muscle protested when she moved. Every nerve burned from the raw skin and bruises left by the pumice and oils. And yet,
there was no rest. The altar was ready, the priestesses prepared, and the high priest approached with instruments that gleamed black and sharp in the firelight. The ceremony was called the opening, and it was no metaphor. The term itself concealed the reality of what would unfold. For 3 days and 3 nights, Nefertari would endure procedures designed to break her body, her mind, and her spirit. She could feel the chill of the limestone against her spine as the priestesses held her arms and legs. The stone drew heat from her body deep into her bones, making her tremble involuntarily. Her teeth chattered, her skin prickled, and yet she could not move, could not resist. Every instinct screamed to flee, but every escape route had vanished weeks ago, in the corridors, in the isolation, in the cleansing. The high priest stepped forward. His face was hidden behind a mask of red ochre, eyes dark and merciless. He lifted the first obsidian blade, catching the lamplight, and spoke words older than any hieroglyphs she had studied. They sounded like curses, each syllable pressing into her mind, making it difficult to think, to breathe, to maintain any coherent thought. The instruments on the small stone table beside the altar were not tools of worship. They were tools of trauma, each one tested and refined over centuries to inflict maximum pain while preserving the life necessary for the ritual to continue. Copper hooks with curved edges, bronze pins with rounded heads, bowls of natron, obsidian blades. These were not random instruments, they had a purpose. They were designed to control, to condition, to transform. Each movement of the priestess's hands, each incision, each burn from natron was deliberate. The herb she had been forced to drink for the last week left her mind thick, foggy, compliant. Thoughts were slow, fragmented, slipping through her consciousness like water through fingers. Her mind was aware, but only just. It could register horror, but not planned resistance. Pain came first, sharp and precise, calculated to break the body, but not destroy it. The cuts were minor by the measure of death, yet excruciating. Her screams were muffled, not by silence alone, but by the drugs coursing through her veins. The copper hooks held tissue aside, exposing the raw wounds. Bronze pins were inserted, meant to remain in place and intensify her suffering. Natron was pressed into each incision, burning, drying, preserving. The purpose was not healing, it was transformation, a remaking of the body into an object, a vessel. The first night blurred into the second. The priests rested only briefly, giving her water, more of the bitter herbal wine, waiting as the wounds throbbed and burned, as the pain became a constant, unrelenting companion. By the second day, her mind had begun to detach. Nefertari watched her own body from a distance, disconnected from her sensations. Dissociation had set in, a survival mechanism forced by the systematic cruelty around her. She was present physically, but absent mentally. Her awareness of the horror was intact, but it no longer touched her as it had on the first day. And still they continued. Each ritual followed centuries of ritual precision. Cuts, hooks, pins, salt. Her body was reshaped, her nerves burned, her identity erased further. The drugs ensured compliance, and the isolation of the chamber meant no one could intervene. Nefertari existed only as a subject, a test, a canvas for the ritual that had been honed over generations. She could not cry anymore, her voice was gone. She could not scream, her lungs burned. She could only endure. By the third day, the rituals reached their final, most invasive stage. The pain was absolute, a constant hum of agony that became her reality. Every cut, every salt application, every manipulation of her body was a lesson. She belonged not to herself, but to the temple, to the gods, to the priests, to the system that had claimed her. The final procedures left marks permanent and undeniable. They were not for her husband, not for spiritual elevation. They were for control, for submission, for the unchallengeable assertion of authority over her body. But even in this horror, Nefertari clung to fragments of her former self. The spark that survived isolation and cleansing persisted. It flickered in the recesses of her mind, hidden behind layers of drugged haze and pain. It whispered that she was still human, still more than the ritual's object. That spark, small as it was, kept her breathing, kept her aware, kept her connected to memory, to the past, to the life she had once known. When the ritual finally concluded, she was allowed to rest. Her body was a map of suffering, every scar, every raw patch of skin a testament to the ceremony. Priestesses applied healing salves, wrapped her in rough linen, gave her soft bread and watered wine. They told her she had been blessed, transformed into a perfect vessel for fertility, that the gods had accepted her. The words were meant to overlay the trauma with meaning, to reframe horror as sacred necessity. But deep inside, Nefertari knew the truth. She had survived. That was all. She had endured the impossible, but she had been irreversibly altered. Her body, her mind, her spirit, each piece had been touched by the ritual, reshaped into something that could comply, could endure, could be used. She was no longer the girl who had walked out of her family home 3 weeks earlier. She was something else entirely. And still, her story was not unique. For every Nefertari who survived, there were others who had not. Some had died during the procedures. Others had perished in the weeks afterward, broken by infection, trauma, or despair. The temple's records mention them only in passing, their deaths described as divine rejection or impurity. They were erased, forgotten, their families shamed into silence. And yet their suffering, like Nefertari's, had been very real. The opening ceremony had ended, but its effects would linger forever. The body and mind, once vibrant, had been transformed. Memory itself would bend, fragment, fade, leaving a survivor who existed in part as herself, in part as the temple demanded. The ritual had succeeded in its purpose. Nefertari could endure. She could bear children. She could obey. But she could never fully return to the life she had lost. As she lay on the altar, exhausted, scarred, and hollowed out, one thought remained. The system worked because it controlled, because it hid, because it reframed horror as necessity. And for the first time, Nefertari understood the magnitude of the power wielded by those who claimed to speak for the gods. The chamber was silent now, save for the drip of water and her shallow breaths. The lamps flickered. Shadows writhed. The ritual had ended, but the story, her story, and the story of countless others was far from over. The lamps burned low in the chamber, their flickering light casting shadows that seemed to cling to Nefertari's raw, scarred skin. She lay wrapped in coarse linen, every inch of her body still aching from the opening ceremony, yet her mind felt oddly detached, floating somewhere beyond the room, beyond the temple, beyond herself. She did not cry, she did not scream, she could not. The drugs, the rituals, the isolation, they had stripped her of more than comfort and safety. They had stripped her of certainty, of identity, of the simple right to exist as she had before. When the priestesses approached to tend her wounds, she barely acknowledged them. Their hands, gentle now with salves and honey, could not touch the hollowness inside her. She remembered the pain, yes, but it was no longer immediate. It existed in another part of her consciousness, alongside the memories of the small, sunlit courtyard at her family home, the smell of lotus flowers floating in the water, the laughter of her younger sister Merit. Those memories felt almost unreal, like tales she had read in books that belonged to someone else. The days after the ceremony were confusing. Nefertari could eat only small amounts, her body rebelling against nourishment after weeks of being stripped and scalded. Sleep came in fits, haunted by fragmented dreams, echoes of the ceremony, flashes of faces, screams that were both hers and not hers. The priestesses brought her food, bread and watered wine, soft and sustaining, but her hands trembled and her mind refused to engage. She existed, but only barely. Yet even in this emptiness, the temple continued its work. They praised her, told her she had been chosen, that the gods were pleased. They framed her survival as virtue, her compliance as devotion, and in a way that framing was part of the ritual's power. It reprogrammed her mind, teaching her that the suffering, the fear, the pain, everything was not only acceptable but necessary. Resistance was folly, compliance was holiness. That lesson, though cruel, would guide her through the rest of her life. Nefertari tried to speak to the priestesses about herself, about who she had been, about her family, about Merit, about the world above the temple walls, but words failed her. They came out broken, incoherent, disjointed. The priestesses did not notice. Or perhaps they did, and it did not matter. Her identity had been a barrier to obedience. Now that barrier was crumbling. One night, as the lamps burned down to stubs, Nefertari stared into the shadows on the walls, tracing the shapes with her eyes, letting them consume her mind. She realized she could no longer distinguish between fear and numbness, pain and relief, reality and hallucination. Her body existed in the room, but her consciousness wandered elsewhere. She remembered her mother's face, her father's pride, Merit's small hands pressing the amulet into hers. Those fragments, fleeting as they were, became her anchors. She clung to them desperately because the temple had taken everything else. Even as she healed physically, her mind bore the invisible scars of the ritual. The isolation, the cleansing, the opening ceremony, they had changed her fundamentally. She no longer felt safe, not in the chamber, not in her own skin. Every touch, every glance, every whisper carried echoes of the ritual. Her body had learned to obey, to endure, to dissociate. Her mind had learned to fragment. The girl who once calculated trade agreements in her head, who read hieratic scripts for pleasure, who danced in the sunlight and laughed at her sister's jokes, she had vanished. But there was survival, and with survival came small sparks of resistance, tiny reminders that she was still herself, somewhere beneath the layers of trauma. She began to test her boundaries, pushing slightly against the instructions of the priestesses, observing how they responded. It was not rebellion. Rebellion could have meant death, but subtle, almost imperceptible tests. Could she drink less of the herbal wine and still be left alone? Could she ask for small tasks and claim a sense of agency without punishment? These were small victories, almost invisible, but they mattered. They reminded her that she had not been completely erased. Her body bore the permanent marks of the ritual: scar tissue, raw patches, minor deformations, all physical evidence of the opening ceremony's purpose. The priestesses applied salves, wrapped her carefully, guided her movements, but the temple's records made it clear these marks were deliberate, part of the conditioning. Each scar was a lesson, a reminder of what had been done, a permanent alteration that made return to normalcy impossible. Nefertari's thoughts occasionally drifted to the other women she had heard about in whispered temple stories. Merit, her sister, who had not survived. Others whose names were erased, whose bodies and spirits had been broken entirely. The knowledge of these fates created a mix of grief, anger, and hollow resignation within her. The temple system had been vast, methodical, unstoppable. Resistance was dangerous, often deadly. Compliance was mandatory, survival precarious. By the end of the second week, she was able to walk again, her steps careful, cautious, guided by pain and memory alike. She began to learn how to eat normally, though each bite reminded her of the rituals, the smells of herbs, the sharp scent of natron and incense. She started to speak again, softly, almost in whispers, testing the boundaries of her voice. And slowly, cautiously, she began to remember. Not the memories as they had been, complete and clear, but fragments, the warmth of her home, the light of the sun, the sound of Merit's laughter, the texture of bread, the smoothness of lotus petals. Those fragments, 25, treated with care, not intentionally, but because they could not undo the past. They continued to praise her survival, framed her endurance as blessing, and reinforced her compliance. And in this strange, inverted way, the ritual continued even after the opening ceremony. The mind must be reconditioned, the narrative rewritten, the trauma reframed as sacred necessity. And yet, in these quiet moments of reflection, Nefertari understood something profound. She had survived. She had endured the unimaginable. And while the temple had changed her, it had not entirely destroyed her. Somewhere within the fractured layers of her psyche, the girl she had been still existed, waiting, watching, remembering. The aftermath was not simply physical recovery, it was psychological recalibration, a painstaking, fragile balance between obedience and memory, compliance and self. The opening ceremony had ended, but the lessons of control, fear, and power remained. Her body was a vessel, her mind a cage, and her spirit a flickering flame. She had survived, yes, but at a cost that would echo for the rest of her life.
The journey from the underground chambers to the sunlit streets of Thebes was both swift and slow. Nefertari's body moved, carried along by the priestesses who guided her steps, yet her mind floated somewhere beyond, detached, observing without participating. The city's familiar sights, the Nile's glinting waters, the bustling markets, the scent of spices and baked bread, felt alien. The world had continued without her, unaware of the horrors she had endured, indifferent to the trauma embedded in her body and mind. Her family's house, once a sanctuary, now loomed like a distant memory, brighter, warmer, and impossibly unreachable. The courtyard where Merit laughed, where her mother tended the garden, where her father negotiated trades, seemed both present and unreal, a place she could touch only in fragments of memory. The amulet her sister had given her, the small charm for protection, had been removed during the cleansing, now resting in the hands of a priestess. That tiny symbol of love and safety, so simple, now seemed like an impossible connection to the girl she had been. The priestesses spoke softly, praising her endurance, framing her survival as a gift to the gods. They reminded her that she was now a vessel, a perfect preparation for marriage, a conduit of divine blessing. And she nodded, not because she agreed, not because she understood, but because nodding required no strength, no choice, no resistance. It was easier than thinking, easier than feeling. Compliance had been ingrained, etched into her very being through weeks of isolation, pain, and ritual. When she was presented to her family, Nefertari's father, Amenhotep, barely recognized her. The bright-eyed, intelligent daughter he had celebrated, the girl who had assisted in trade agreements and delighted in reading complex scrolls, was gone. In her place stood a pale, trembling figure, bald, scarred, eyes hollow, moving with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned to survive through obedience. Her mother's soft sobs were barely heard over the priestess's reminders that she had been chosen, that the gods were pleased, that everything was as it should be. Her younger sister Merit, still too young to understand the full scope, clutched at the empty air, searching for the sister she remembered, only to find a stranger in her place. The family's home, once filled with laughter, music, and warmth, now felt suffocating. Nefertari's senses were overwhelmed by the normalcy she could no longer relate to. Each sound, each touch, each word carried reminders of what she had lost. She recoiled from the soft linens of her bed, the fragrances of food, the casual touch of hands. All sensations that once brought comfort now brought unease. Her body had been a vessel of ritual. Her mind had been trained to exist in a state of hollow compliance. Pleasure, joy, curiosity, all had been stripped, leaving only endurance. Yet society demanded more than mere survival. Marriage awaited. Her body, though scarred and altered, had been prepared for the ceremony that would bind her to a husband she did not know. She learned, with quiet dread, that her new life required her to perform as if nothing had happened, to smile, to obey, to participate in the rhythms of domesticity while carrying the invisible wounds of the temple within her. Every glance from her mother, every question from her father, every whispered expectation from neighbors, reminded her that her life now belonged to others, to the gods, to the priests, to her husband, to society. The first night she spent in her family home was unbearable. Shadows from the oil lamps stretched across the walls, reminding her of the chamber's confines. The scent of incense, once sacred, now brought nausea, recalling the overwhelming smell of the ritual. She tried to sleep, tried to close her mind against memories that flooded relentlessly. But the pain, the drugs, the isolation, the trauma, they had left marks too deep to ignore. She drifted in and out of consciousness, nightmares and flashbacks mingling with fragments of reality, her body awake while her mind wandered. Days turned into weeks. Nefertari began to relearn the rhythms of life outside the temple, but her recovery was partial, fragile. Eating became tolerable, walking more confident, speech clearer. But always beneath the surface, the rituals lingered, shaping every thought, every action, every breath. She spoke less, smiled less, laughed almost never. Her intelligence, once a source of pride and joy, had not vanished, but it was now tempered by caution, by learned compliance, by the silent knowledge that the world could inflict pain in ways she could not always anticipate. Her marriage approached. The man chosen for her, a young noble, unfamiliar and distant, expected a bride who would fulfill his needs, who would bear children, who would be compliant and obedient. He could not know what she had endured, what scars lay beneath her skin, what fractures lay within her mind. And Nefertari herself, trained to dissociate, to obey, to endure, prepared to meet him as she had been trained, not as herself, but as the perfect vessel the temple had created. The first moments of her wedding night were strange and disorienting. She observed her own body as though from a distance, detached from her own sensations. Pain and pleasure were muted, the ritual's effects creating a hollow state of compliance that persisted even beyond the temple's walls. She moved mechanically, responding to cues she no longer fully understood, performing the actions expected of her while her mind floated above, watching, calculating, dissociating. This state, while protective, also underscored the cost of her survival. The part of her that was bright, joyful, curious, and human now existed only as a memory. Even after the marriage, the trauma lingered. Nights were haunted by hallucinations, dreams of the cold altar, of sharp blades, of priestesses' blank, painted faces. Days were marked by fatigue, chronic pain, and a pervasive emptiness that colored her interactions with the world. Her family, her husband, the community, all expected her to perform, to act, to live as though nothing had happened. But she knew the truth. She had been fundamentally changed, and no amount of ritual praise, familial love, or marital expectation could restore the girl she once had been. Despite the trauma, there were moments of clarity. In the quiet, when no eyes were watching, Nefertari allowed herself to remember the courtyard, Merit's laughter, her father's pride, the bright sunlight on her face. Those memories, however fragmented, became small refuges, places she could retreat to when the world felt too heavy, too demanding, too painful. They reminded her that beneath the scars, beneath the dissociation, beneath the ritual's imprint, the essence of Nefertari still remained, fragile but alive. The temple's reach, however, did not fully end with the ritual. Its teachings persisted, woven into her consciousness, shaping her interactions with authority, obedience, and compliance. She had been trained to internalize the lessons. Survival required submission. Compliance validated her existence. Resistance was dangerous. These lessons, learned through pain and terror, would follow her for the rest of her life, shaping her role as wife, mother, and member of society. The reintegration was not a return to normal life. It was a continuation of survival under a new guise. The ritual had ended, but the consequences persisted, invisible yet pervasive, shaping every thought, every action, every breath. Nefertari walked among the living, spoke to family and neighbors, performed duties and rituals. Yet inside, the chambers of the temple still existed, shadows that could never be fully escaped. And so, life continued. Nefertari endured, as she had learned to endure. Each day was a delicate balance between compliance and survival, memory and dissociation, pain and resilience. She had survived the opening ceremony, but she had paid a price no one could measure, a cost that would echo through her body, her mind, and her soul for the rest of her life. The hollowed self remained a testament to the temple's power, the systematic cruelty of the ritual, and the human capacity to survive unimaginable suffering. She existed,
Yes, but not as she once had. She was both Nefertari and something else entirely, a living memory of the ritual, a warning to those who would seek to understand the depths of human cruelty and resilience. The sun rose over Thebes, painting the city in gold. But for Nefertari, the light offered little comfort. Each morning brought the same hollow awareness, the same silent terror that had followed her from the temple's stone chambers into her family home and then into her marriage. The world outside moved with ease. Traders shouted prices along the Nile. Children played in courtyards. Priests conducted ceremonies, but she moved among them like a ghost,
a hollow shell wearing the semblance of life. Her reflection in polished bronze mirrors startled her. She hardly recognized the girl staring back. The smooth, pale skin, the neatly combed hair, the faint traces of beauty preserved by careful grooming. Yet in her eyes lay the empty corridors of memory, the chambers where the temple had stripped her of identity, of agency, of innocence. No surface appearance could hide the lasting marks, the subtle trembling, the flickers of panic when a shadow fell too sharply across a room or a hand reached for her unexpectedly. The first years of her marriage were a carefully choreographed performance. Her husband, young and unversed in the realities of ritual trauma, expected obedience, respect, and compliance. Nefertari gave him that outwardly, but within her a storm brewed, a mixture of rage, sorrow, and numbness. Nights were particularly torturous. Sleep offered no reprieve. The cold altar, the chanting priestesses, the scent of oil and incense, all returned relentlessly, a replay of every violation, every humiliation. Yet she endured, as she had been trained, as she had learned she must. Survival required this endurance. Her children arrived in later years. Sons and daughters who should have brought joy instead became symbols of her fragmented self. She loved them, but always at a distance. Touch and tenderness were filtered through the lens of control, a learned avoidance of vulnerability. Each cry of a newborn stirred memories she had tried to bury, triggering anxiety and fear, a whisper of the temple's long reach. She knew she had to be careful. Her pain was hers, but the world expected her to mask it. Failure was not an option. The ghosts of the temple demanded compliance, even now. Despite the ongoing trauma, Nefertari found ways to reclaim fragments of herself. Quiet moments in the early morning when the city slept allowed her to read scrolls in the garden, tracing letters with her fingertips, reconnecting with the intellectual curiosity that the temple had sought to suppress. Occasionally, she allowed herself to laugh quietly with her children, her own voice trembling with unfamiliar freedom. Those moments, though fleeting, reminded her that survival did not mean total surrender. Within the hollow shell, a spark remained, faint, fragile, but stubbornly alive. Her family, now older and aware of the subtle changes in her demeanor, spoke little of the temple. The ritual's shadow was not discussed. It was simply acknowledged in the silence of shared glances and careful gestures. Even her husband, though observant, lacked understanding. How could he know the depths of a ritual designed to erase selfhood, to convert a human into a vessel for the gods' whims? How could anyone who had not experienced the chamber, the stripping, the chants, the smoke, understand the invisible chains that still bound her? Word of the temple's practices, once whispered in the streets of Thebes, faded with time. The city's chroniclers recorded ceremonies in golden terms, describing rituals as offerings to the gods, omitting the suffering of the individuals who had endured them. Nefertari's story, like those of countless others, became invisible, erased from history, even as it persisted in the bodies and minds of survivors. Yet she carried the memory, a private testimony to the cost of devotion, the cruelty hidden behind sacred rites, the cost exacted on human life for the sake of divine favor. Her later years brought reflection and a careful reckoning with the past. She taught her children not only the skills required for survival and success in society, but also the subtle art of resilience, the ability to endure, to adapt, to navigate a world that could be cruel and arbitrary. She never fully spoke of the temple, but through guidance and example, she imparted lessons of caution, discernment, and inner strength. Those who listened closely could sense the depth of her experience, the wisdom born from suffering, the shadow of memory that never left her. Her body aged, as all bodies do, but her spirit remained alert, tempered by years of survival. She bore scars visible and invisible, yet she persisted, walking through life with the quiet authority of someone who had faced incomprehensible pain and survived. In her final days, she often returned to the quiet of her garden, watching sunlight ripple across the Nile, remembering her childhood, the temple, the family, and the life she had rebuilt. The pain never vanished entirely, but neither did her sense of agency, however limited it might have seemed. As she lay in her final moments, Nefertari reflected on the temple and the world it had shaped. The chamber, the rituals, the high priestess's chants, all had tried to define her, to shape her into something less than human. And yet, in the end, she had reclaimed a portion of herself, preserved through memory, intellect, and quiet defiance. The hollow shell had not been destroyed. It had become a vessel of wisdom, a repository of understanding, a testament to the human capacity to endure even the darkest of rites. The sun set over Thebes one final time in her life, bathing the city in gold and shadow. Nefertari closed her eyes not as a victim, but as someone who had faced the depths of human cruelty, emerged scarred but unbroken, and preserved a fragment of humanity that no ritual, no priest, and no centuries could ever erase.